There's a $50 Casio that's built to the exact same dive standard as watches costing 10 and 20 times as much. But once you know that number exists, the whole idea that a real dive watch has to cost serious money just quietly falls apart. These are 8 budget divers that punch so far above their price it almost feels like a pricing mistake. And I've ranked them from the cheapest shock to the one I'd actually wear before a real trip. And I'll be straight about where each one cuts a corner, because they all do. Somewhere between the toy end of the shelf and the Rolex end, there's a whole stretch of divers handing you genuine dive watch engineering. Sapphire crystal, solar power, proper Swiss movements for the price of a decent dinner or two. By the end of this, you'll know exactly which specs actually matter on a diver: the screw-down crown, the water rating, the crystal material, the movement doing the work inside, so you can spot real value on any watch you pick up, not just these 8. And anybody who tells you a cheap watch has 0 compromises is selling you something. Let's start with the one that broke the rules for everybody else. Number 1, the Casio Duro, and depending on the day and the seller, you're paying somewhere around $50 to $60 for it. This is the watch that started the whole spend less, get more conversation for a lot of people, and it earned that reputation honestly. You'll see it sold under the reference MDV1006 or the slightly updated MDV107, and collectors nicknamed it the Marlin. Look at what's actually on your wrist here: a 200-meter water resistance rating, a screw-down crown that physically seals the movement against pressure when you lock it down against the case, and a unidirectional dive bezel, one that only turns counterclockwise, so if it gets knocked mid-dive, it underreads your elapsed time instead of telling you you've still got air when you don't. That last one isn't a gimmick, it's a genuine safety principle. The same reason a serious diver's bezel only rotates one direction. Those are the boxes on the ISO 64225 checklist, the international standard that defines what actually counts as a diver's watch. And this thing ticks them at a price you'd normally spend on a phone case. And it looks the part too, which matters more than snobs like to admit. That sunburst blue dial catches light on the wrist like something far more expensive. The case openly borrows from the Rolex Submariner playbook. And the whole silhouette reads as a proper diver from across a room. The lume glows on cue, the date window sits at 3 o'clock and stays legible underwater. The hands are clean and functional. And because it's quartz, it's accurate. We're talking gaining or losing only a few seconds a month, which is a level of precision the mechanical watches later in this list can only dream about. Now here's where I keep it honest, because this channel doesn't do fantasy specs. The crystal is mineral glass, not sapphire, so it will pick up scratches if you're careless, and you'll catch them under the right light. The bracelet is a basic pin and collar folded link design with a stamped clasp. The first thing most enthusiasts swap for a cheap rubber or fabric strap within a week of buying it. And the quartz movement, while accurate, has none of the mechanical romance. No sweeping second hand, no soul, just a battery ticking away in there. But think about what you're actually complaining about at $50. You're annoyed that a dive-rated watch costing less than a tank of gas didn't also throw in a luxury crystal and a machined bracelet. Put a decent strap on this thing, and it'll genuinely go swimming, survive being thrown in a bag for a decade, and keep near-perfect time the whole time. If you ever wanted proof that price and capability stop tracking each other early, the Duro is Exhibit A. Here's the part that sneaks up on people. Almost nobody buys the Duro expecting to love it. They grab it as a cheap beater, or a bit of a joke, or a first toe in the water, and then it just quietly becomes the watch they reach for every single morning. Put it on a tropic rubber strap or a gray fabric NATO, and it photographs like a watch 5 or 6 times the price, which is exactly why micro brands charging $300 and $400 for a similar look have such a hard time competing with it. It's also one of the most modified cheap watches on Earth. People swap the mineral crystal for sapphire, drop in a better bezel insert, and end up with a genuinely upgraded diver for under $100 all in. At $50, the Duro isn't really a watch so much as a gateway into this entire hobby, and plenty of serious collectors will tell you it's where they started. And it isn't even the most impressive engineering on this list. Number 2, the Seiko 5 sports diver, sitting around $250 to $300, And this is the watch I hand people the moment they tell me they want to get into real mechanical watches. Inside is Seiko's 4R36 automatic movement, 24 joules, and no battery anywhere. It winds itself from the ordinary motion of your wrist, and if you hold it up to your ear in a quiet room, you can actually hear it running. That mechanical heart is the entire appeal. You get a proper Japanese automatic that hacks, meaning the second's hand stops dead when you pull the crown so you can set the time precisely to the second, and hand winds so you can top it up manually when it's been sitting in a drawer. That's a real upgrade over Seiko's old 7S26 movement, which did neither. It holds a charge for roughly 41 hours off the wrist, and most of them have an exhibition caseback, a little window showing the movement oscillating away, which is a genuinely lovely thing to own on a watch this affordable. And the whole package borrows its looks straight from Seiko's legendary dive heritage, that fat, wide loom, the knurled bezel edge, a case around 42.5 millimeters that reads like a serious tool watch and could pass for something twice the price on the wrist. But I have to be straight with you here because there's a spec claim floating around this watch that I want to set right on the record. The modern Seiko 5 Sports is rated to 100 meters. That's plenty for swimming, showering, and everyday wear, but it falls short of the 200 meters you genuinely want for actual scuba work, and it does not carry the full ISO dive certification. Seiko themselves position it as a style-forward sports watch, not a saturation diving tool, and much of the range doesn't even use a screw-down crown. So if what you genuinely want is a certified screw-down 200-meter Seiko diver, at roughly this same money, the watch you're actually after lives in Seiko's Prospects line, the ones enthusiasts call the Turtle and the Samurai. That's the honest pointer, and I'd much rather you hear it from me than from a comment section correction later. You also have to accept that the 4R36 is not a precision instrument. It can run a fair few seconds fast or slow every day, and that's simply normal at this price. But none of that is what this watch is for. What the 5 Sports actually is the best on-ramp into genuine mechanical watchmaking with a real dive look that money can buy and dozens of dial and style variations. For most people picking up their very first automatic, it's exactly the right watch. What really sells the 5 Sports, though, is how it wears in real life. It slides right under a shirt cuff at the office. It looks completely at home with a t-shirt on the weekend. And swapping the bracelet for a leather or canvas strap changes its whole personality in about 2 minutes flat. It's the watch a lot of people point back to years later as the one that kicked off their entire collection, because owning your first self-winding mechanical movement genuinely does something to you. You start caring about power reserves and caseback windows and the little sweep of the seconds hand. And if you set it next to a Swiss automatic costing 3 times as much, the honest truth is the Seiko gives up shockingly little in the actual day-to-day experience of wearing and owning it. That's the entire pitch. A real mechanical watch, a real dive-inspired design, and a price low enough that you've still got money left for the next one. Just know precisely what you're buying and don't take it to the bottom of the ocean. Number 3. The Orient Kamasu, and this one lands around $180, which makes what it manages to include borderline unreasonable. Because the Kamasu comes with a sapphire crystal. Sapphire is the scratch-resistant material you find on watches, costing many times this. The stuff that shrugs off keys and desk corners and car doors and still looks brand new years later. And on the Kamasu, it even carries an anti-reflective coating so the dial stays readable in bright, direct sun. Getting sapphire on a sub-$200 automatic diver is the kind of thing that quietly makes other brands look like they've been overcharging you the whole time. And Orient didn't stop at the crystal. The case mixes brushed and polished surfaces, so it catches light like a considered piece of design instead of a raw slab of steel. The hour markers are applied metal rather than printed on. There's a handy day and date display, and inside runs Orient's own F6922 automatic. That movement hacks and it hand winds, the 2 features enthusiasts always ask for and rarely get at this price. And for the value hunters keeping score, Orient is owned by Seiko Epson, so the mechanical pedigree standing behind this thing is completely real. The Kamasu is essentially the sharper-dressed sibling of Orient's own Mako and Ray divers, and it's the one I'd steer you toward of the 3. The honest catch, and every watch here has one, is that bracelet clasp. It's a stamped, folded design that feels noticeably cheaper than the rest of the watch around it, and it's usually the very first thing owners upgrade or swap out for a nice strap. The lume is fine, but not spectacular. It glows on command and then fades faster than the truly great stuff Seiko puts on its divers. And the case wears a touch large and flat at around 41.5 millimeters, so smaller wrists really should try it on before committing. But you're nitpicking a clasp on a watch that hands you sapphire, an in-house automatic, applied indices, a day date, and a genuine 200-meter water resistance rating, all for less than $200. When people ask me for the single best pure dollar-for-dollar value in this entire category, the Kamasu is the one I have to physically stop myself from recommending every single time, because it quietly makes the price math on almost everything else in the segment look bad. There's a real reason the Kamasu built a cult following. Orient sits in this strange sweet spot where it's a genuine Japanese manufacturer making its own movements, but it flies so far under the radar that you're not paying a single cent for brand hype. You're just paying for the watch. It comes in a handful of dial colors with the blue and the green as the runaway crowd favorites, and it takes standard width straps so the whole aftermarket is wide open to you. In everyday wear, the F6922 keeps perfectly acceptable time for a mechanical at this price, and that sapphire crystal means it still looks sharp after months of careless real-world abuse on the wrist. For a lot of enthusiasts, the Kamasu is the exact watch they recommend the second a friend says they've got a tight budget and wants to be talked out of buying something worse. Speaking of the math getting strange, wait until you see what solar power does to the next one. Number 4. The Citizen Promaster Diver, specifically the Eco-Drive version. And depending on the exact reference, you're looking at somewhere between $250 and $350. This is the watch I recommend to people who want a dive watch and then genuinely never want to think about maintaining it again, because the Eco-Drive part is properly clever engineering. There's a solar cell hidden right under the dial. Any light at all, direct sunlight, a bright office, a desk lamp, the glow coming through a window charges a capacitor inside the case, and that capacitor is what runs the watch. There is no battery to replace, not ever, and when it's fully topped up, it'll keep running in total darkness for around 6 months. You could leave this thing in a drawer through an entire winter, pull it out, sit it under a lamp for an afternoon, and it comes right back to life. And that capacitor is rated to keep going for decades, far longer than the year or two you'd ever squeeze out of a battery. For a tool watch you might not wear every single day, that is the feature that actually matters more than any bragging right on the spec sheet. And crucially, this is the real thing, a diver with the credentials to prove it out in the water. The Citizen Promaster Diver is ISO 6425 certified, rated to 200 meters, with the screw-down crown and the unidirectional bezel that the certification genuinely demands, on references enthusiasts know well, like the BNW150 and BNW151. Citizen has been building dive watches for actual working professionals for decades, and that reputation is genuinely earned out in the field. The honest catch is the crystal. The standard reference uses mineral glass rather than sapphire, so it's more scratch-prone than the Orient we were just talking about, though some Promaster references do step the crystal up, and that's genuinely worth checking on the specific one you're eyeing. It also wears big and chunky, that classic 44mm Promaster footprint with a thick, tall case, which is fantastic on a larger wrist and a real handful on a smaller one. But you're getting certified dive credentials and a power source you will never once have to service for the price a lot of buyers throw at a mid-tier fashion watch that does neither of those things. Run the long-term math on this thing, and it looks even better. A normal quartz watch needs a fresh battery every couple of years, which means a trip to a watchmaker, a service fee, and the case getting cracked open again and again across its life. The Eco-Drive never asks for any of that. You wear it, light keeps it alive, and that's basically the entire maintenance schedule for the next decade or two. Citizen's dive watches also carry a real reputation with people who actually get wet for a living. Working divers, rescue crews, folks who need a watch that just works and could not care less whether it's fashionable. You can run it on the steel bracelet or a thick rubber strap. The lume is strong and genuinely useful down in dark water. And the whole thing is built to be grabbed off the nightstand and worn without a second thought. It's a proper set-it-and-forget-it tool watch, and there aren't many of those at any price. That's the trade on the table, and it's a very good one. Number 5. The Seiko 5 Sports SRPD series, around $250 to $280. And yes, this is Seiko showing up again because Seiko earned 2 entirely separate spots on this list by making 2 genuinely different arguments for your money. Where the earlier 5 Sports was about getting you into mechanical watches in the first place, this SRPD line is all about the case and the raw construction. These are the direct descendants of the Seiko SKX, specifically the beloved SKX 007, the diver Seiko discontinued back in 2019 and that people now pay a real premium for in the used market, sometimes double what it originally sold for. The SRPD, nicknamed the 5KX by collectors, inherited that famous crushed hockey puck case shape, the one that just feels indestructible the moment it lands in your hand, along with the day date and drilled lugs that make swapping straps completely effortless. Inside runs the same 4R36 automatic, hacking and hand winding, that reliable Japanese workhorse, and the whole thing is built to take a real beating and shrug it clean off. Being honest, this movement is not a precision instrument, same story as its cousin. The 4R36 can run several seconds fast or slow per day, and that's completely normal for the money, so if pinpoint accuracy is what you care about, a good quartz will flat out embarrass it. The 100-meter rating means it's a desk diver and a beach and pool watch. It'll handle swimming and a day out in the rain without blinking, but it isn't a scuba tool, and I want to be clear-eyed with you about that. And some of the stock strap and bracelet options feel a little plasticky against a case this genuinely good, which is exactly why so many owners immediately put it on a rubber or leather strap through those handy drilled lugs. But the value story here is the case and the enormous world attached to it. You are buying SKX grade, build quality, and that whole iconic silhouette brand new, in your choice of a dozen dial colors with a warranty, for a fraction of what people now pay for the discontinued original. On top of that, the SRPD sits at the center of probably the biggest watch modding community on Earth. So you can swap the bezel, the dial, the hands, the crystal, and slowly build a personal version that's entirely your own. And it's worth understanding just how big the SKX story really is, because it's the whole reason this watch matters. When Seiko killed off the SKX 007 back in 2019, a watch that had been the default recommendation for a first serious diver for years and years, prices on the used ones shot up almost overnight, and they've stayed up there ever since. The SRPD is Seiko quietly handing that same look and feel back to you, brand new, updated with the better hacking movement and a bit more polish on the case. Then there's the aftermarket, which is a world unto itself. Entire companies exist purely to make replacement dials, bezel inserts, hands, and chapter rings for this one exact case, so you can start with a plain stock SRPD and slowly turn it into a one-of-one build that literally nobody else on Earth owns. Very few watches at any price hand you that kind of playground. As a watch to actually knock around in, garden in, travel with. And never once, baby, the SRPD is one of the most sensible mechanical watches on the whole planet. Real quick, before the back half, if you're getting something out of this, hit subscribe. I do an honest breakdown like this every single week. The watches the big reviewers overhype and the quiet ones everybody sleeps on. Now let's keep going, because the next 3 are where the engineering gets genuinely hard to argue with, starting with the one watch here that costs real money and is somehow still a bargain. Number 6. The Baltic Aquascaphe, and this is the big jump because we're now looking at around $650 to $760, more than some of the earlier watches cost combined. So let me tell you exactly why it still earns its place on a value list. Baltic is a French micro brand out of Paris, founded around 2017, and it launched the Aquascaphe through crowdfunding, with the founder chasing one very specific idea: making a vintage-style diver that looks like a gorgeous 1960s skin diver, but is engineered to fully modern standards underneath. And they absolutely pulled it off. On the wrist, the Aquascaphe is a genuine stunner. There's a compact case at around 39 millimeters, a domed box sapphire crystal that bends and warps the light around the edges of the dial exactly the way an old acrylic crystal used to, gilt or cream accents depending on the dial you choose, and a choice of period. Correct bracelets like a beads of rice. The whole watch looks like an heirloom you inherited from a well-dressed grandfather, rather than something you bought online last Tuesday. But it is absolutely not a costume piece, and that's the part that earns it a slot here. Underneath those vintage looks sits a 200-meter water resistance rating, a proper screw-down crown, and a reliable Miyota 9039 automatic doing the actual work. A movement that hacks, hand-wins, and skips the date entirely for that clean vintage dial symmetry. So you get all the romance of a 60s diver with none of the fragility that a real 60s diver would come with. In a compact case size that plenty of enthusiasts actively prefer over the dinner plate divers everyone else keeps making. The honest catch is real though, and I won't soft pedal it. Baltic is a micro brand, which means if something ever goes wrong, you're dealing with a smaller service operation and longer turnaround times, without the global network of Seiko or Citizen dealers you'd otherwise find on nearly every corner. That vintage correct case also wears deliberately tight and small, which is a feature if that's your taste and a genuine deal breaker if you like real presence on the wrist. And at this price, you have clearly stepped out of impulse buy territory and into save up for it territory, so it needs to be a watch you actually love, not just tolerate. Baltic has quietly become one of the most respected names in the entire micro-brand world off the back of this one design. And that reputation shows up in a couple of very practical ways. These watches hold their value well on the used market, which is genuinely not something you can say about most sub-$1,000 watches, so if it ever doesn't work out for you, you're not taking a bath on the resale. The dial choices, the black, the blue, the cream, the salmon, each give the watch a completely different character, and the bracelet options, from a beads of rice to a tropic rubber, let you dress it up sharp or beach it right out. If you've fallen down the vintage diver rabbit hole, but you don't want the constant reliability headaches of an actual 60-year-old watch, the Aquascaphe is the answer a huge number of collectors eventually land on. But pound for pound against the micro-brand competition, and honestly against a lot of Swiss watches costing double, the Aquascaphe delivers a level of design and finishing that punches straight up into a class it has no business being anywhere near. Number 7. The Timex Expedition and Navi Diver, and we crash right back down to earth here around $60 to $90. After the Baltic, this one feels like a transmission from a completely different universe. And that hard contrast is exactly the point of including it. Because the Timex makes an argument that nothing else on this entire list even attempts. It is the honest, unglamorous, close to bulletproof one. There is no sapphire here, no in-house mechanical movement to admire through a caseback, no heritage story told in a hushed voice. What there is a reliable quartz movement, a clean, legible dive-style dial, that famous Timex Indiglo backlight, first introduced back in 1992, that turns the whole face into a soft, even glow the instant you press the crown, and a reputation built over literal decades of being the watch that simply refuses to die on you. Timex has real field and military watchmaking in its history, the kind of no-nonsense tool watches soldiers and travelers actually relied on, and that DNA runs right through this thing. I'm not going to oversell it because Timex genuinely doesn't need me to. The crystal is acrylic or basic mineral depending on the exact model, so it will scratch, though acrylic has the funny party trick of buffing right back out with a bit of polish and a soft cloth. The finishing is tool-grade, resin, and brushed steel, nothing on it that's going to make a collector's heart race across a room. And the water resistance, depending on which specific model you grab, ranges from splash and swim up to something more usable, so genuinely check the reference before you assume anything about depth. But none of that is what this watch is actually for. The Timex is the beater, plain and simple. It's the one you wear kayaking down a river or doing yard work in the sun, or on a trip through somewhere sketchy where you'd honestly rather lose a cheap watch than an expensive one and never think about it again. And if you want a small step up in materials and finishing, the Expedition North line is Timex taking the same idea a bit more seriously. It costs less than dinner for two, it keeps accurate time, and it just works over and over for years on a single battery. This is also the watch I'd hand to a kid, or throw in a bag for travel, or give to the person who keeps insisting they always break watches. There's nothing precious about it, and that's genuinely freeing. The battery runs for years. The Indiglo is actually more useful in the dark than the fancy glowing lume on watches costing 20 times more. And if it gets stolen or lost or crushed under a car door, you just shrug and buy another one next week. Timex has been quietly making dependable, affordable watches for over a century and a half, and the Navi and Expedition divers are that whole philosophy boiled right down to its cheapest, most honest form. It's not trying to be an heirloom. It's trying to survive kayak trips and airport security lines and weekend yard work, and at that specific job, it's close to unbeatable. In a list absolutely full of watches straining to impress you, there's something quietly honest about the one that only cares whether it functions. Number 8. The Tissot Seastar, around $400 to $500, and this is the one. If this whole video has been climbing steadily toward a single watch that I'd actually strap on before a real trip, a watch that feels like a true step up in class without the true step up in class price tag, this is it. And it isn't especially close. Because the Seastar is Swiss, and it genuinely wears like it. Tissot has been making watches since the 1850s, and sits inside the Swatch Group, the exact same corporate family that owns Omega, and you can feel that pedigree in the small details when you handle one. Look at the Seastar 1000 specifically. This is a 300-meter rated diver, deeper than almost everything else on this entire list, with a screw-down crown, a ceramic bezel insert that resists scratches and sun fading the way a much pricier watch would, and a bezel action that clicks around with a properly damped, confident feel instead of the loose, gritty rattle you get on cheaper divers. Little touches like that ceramic insert are exactly where you feel the Swatch Group part spin working in your favor. But the single detail that actually wins me over completely is the clasp. The Seastar comes with a proper diver's clasp that includes a wetsuit extension, a hidden folding section that lets the bracelet expand to fit right over the sleeve of a diving suit. That is a real, functional, genuinely thought-about piece of engineering that the overwhelming majority of watches at this price simply do not bother to include. And it quietly tells you, Tissot set out to build an actual diver, not a diver-shaped fashion accessory. The honest note here is all about the movement choice you'll face. The Quartz Seastar is the value sweet spot, and it's superb, dead accurate, and about as low maintenance as watches get. But the automatic version, running the Powermatic 80 movement with its genuinely impressive 80-hour power reserve, meaning you take it off on Friday and it's still ticking Monday morning, pushes you right up toward the top of that price range, so you'll have to decide for yourself whether the mechanical heart is worth the stretch. Either way, what you're holding is a Swiss-made, 300-meter rated, ceramic bezeled, properly finished diver with real clasp engineering, for the money most buyers blow on a mid-range everything else. It's worth knowing what you're really getting with that Swiss movement too. The Powermatic 80 is built on proven ETA architecture tuned to reach that long 80-hour reserve, and the newer versions run an anti-magnetic hairspring that makes them far more resistant to the magnets in phones, laptops, and speakers that quietly wreck ordinary mechanical watches over time. That's real modern watchmaking, the kind you honestly don't expect to find anywhere near this price. The ceramic bezel insert won't fade to a sad washed-out gray after a few summers in the sun the way a cheap aluminum insert eventually does. And because the Seastar reads as a proper diver but still cleans up nicely under a sleeve, it genuinely works as a one-watch collection, the single watch that covers the office, the weekend, and the water without you needing to own anything else. For a lot of people who fall into this hobby, that turns out to be the real goal all along. And that is the entire game these 8 watches have been playing this whole time. The $50 Casio is the one that breaks your brain on the spec sheet. The Seastar is the one I'd actually put on my wrist, zip a jacket over the cuff, and forget about for a full week without ever once feeling like I'd cheaped out. Every single watch on this list wins that game in its own way. The Seastar just wins it wearing a suit. If you want the flip side of all this, the watches people massively overpay for that are quietly worth avoiding, that breakdown is on screen right now.